In the last section, we had a discussion about how the text input interacts with our component level state. We're going to continue now by spinning out this text input as a reusable component. So the reason that we're going to do this is having to recreate our text input every time with obviously what is probably going to end up being a lot of styling on here, right? We're going to need to add a lot of styling to this thing just to make it look nice. And so I think that creating this as a reusable component would save us a lot of time, considering that we might want to reuse this text input in the future. So that's our goal. We want to create a reusable input to serve as our text input. Let's take a look at a diagram really quick, just to remember exactly what we want this thing to look like. So we want to have the text input in here, kind of off to the right-hand side. So the user should be able to tap to the right-hand side here and enter some amount of text. By default, we should have a placeholder, so some placeholder text. And then on the left-hand side, we should have the option to add in a label of sorts. So this is not the value over here. This is supposed to be a label to tell the user, hey, please enter an email over here to the right-hand side. So let's give this a shot. We will place this reusable input, or this reusable component, in the same location as all of our other reusable components, which is the common directory. So we're going to add a new file. And for our reusable text input, we're just going to simply call it input. So input.js. And then inside of here, we're going to place our usual boilerplate. So I'll import React. From React, we'll import a couple of helpers from React Native, our text input, a view tag, and a text tag. And then we'll define the component itself. I'm going to make this a functional component, and we'll talk about why in just a second. And then finally, we will do our export of input at the bottom. Because this is one of the files that we are going to immediately import and export, kind of like that pass through from our index.js file, I'm going to wrap input with the curly braces, and I'm not going to use the default keyword. So now we'll flip over to index, and we will immediately add our little helper in here, export star from input. So now any other file inside of our project can import the input tag from the index file inside of our common directory. Now inside of the input component itself, we're going to place just a little bit of JSX in here, and just to kind of get ourselves started, and then we'll talk about exactly how we're going to design this thing. So I'm going to place just a little bit of stand-in JSX for now. I'm going to return a view tag, and then inside of there, I'm going to add in a text tag. So the purpose of this text tag right here is to serve as that label that's going to float off to the left-hand side. So here's our mock-up right here. I want to have some amount of text that's just going to float over to the left and tell the user, hey, here's what you're supposed to enter into this thing. So since we want this to be a reusable component, we're going to want to be able to reconfigure or determine what that label should be on the fly. So what I mean by that is I want to pass in the label text as a prop to this component. So I think we don't really need to beat around the bush here. We can receive a prop from our props object, and I'm going to just arbitrarily right now, remember all these prop names that we specify, all the ones we create, I'm just kind of making up on the fly here. I'm going to say that we should call this thing with a label prop, and then whatever text I pass in as the label prop, we should add it inside this text component or this text tag right here. So now by default, if I use the input component somewhere, I can pass in a prop of label, and that label should show up inside of it. Cool, so good enough start here. Let's continue working on this in the next section.